Good morning, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. Well, tomorrow, President Biden and President Vladimir Putin meet for 5 hours with the future of U.S.-Russia relations hanging in the balance. The official agenda touches on bilateral relations, cybercrime, climate change, and the Arctic, economic cooperation, and regional security issues from around the globe. Expectations from the summit are low, though, considering that the relationship between Moscow and Washington is at a post-Cold War low.
Biden plans to challenge Putin on sensitive issues, including alleged Russian ransomware attacks, military actions in Ukraine, election interference, and the treatment of jailed Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Earlier, President Biden called Putin bright, tough, and a worthy adversary at a news conference following the NATO summit. The president said he will tell the Russian leader at their meeting tomorrow that it's in his interest to change the perception of his regime.
Every world leader here as a member of NATO that spoke today, and most of them mentioned it, thanked me for meeting with Putin now. Every single one.
Well, joining us now is Bloomberg's Russia managing editor Tori Clark in Moscow and Bloomberg U.S. foreign policy reporter Nick Wadhams, who just arrived this morning in Geneva. A big thank you to both of you for taking the time. Hey, Nick, let's start with you. Should we expect anything to come of this meeting tomorrow?
That's a great question. I think there are two possible areas where you could see some progress. One is on what the U.S. calls strategic stability. So the possibility of starting some sort of new dialogue, whether formal or not, toward a new arms control regime. The New START treaty expires in 2026, and there's a whole host of other weapons systems that the U.S. wants to include in arms control talks with Moscow. So that's one area where both sides have interest. On a more basic level, consular ties between these two countries have just shattered in the last few years. So the ambassadors, the U.S. ambassador and the Russian ambassador, aren't even in each other's countries right now. So there is some talk that you could have the ambassadors return and possibly some new efforts to try to unstick the works of the consular process, so it's easier for people to get visas to travel between the two countries, which is a process that has really slowed down.
And Tori, our reporter, Bloomberg reporter Maria Tadeo, is reporting that the meeting is supposed to last between 4 and 5 hours. Let's just talk about success for both of these leaders, right? Many people are saying success for Putin is that the meeting is happening at all. What would you say on both sides?
I would agree. Just the fact of the summit is a success already for Putin. One of his main concerns is being taken seriously, keeping Russia at the top of the global priorities, the U.S. agenda. And so having this first meeting with Biden as president is a step towards that. Again, the Kremlin, as Nick was saying, the Kremlin has said that they don't have very great hopes for the meeting. They have practical, but not great optimism.
Hey, Tori, give us an idea. You're in Moscow. Give us an idea how this is being portrayed by the press in Moscow. Give us an idea of what things are like right now as these two leaders are set for this historic meeting.
They've been very cautious, looking hopeful, but definitely taking measured tone towards what might happen. So far, none of the foreign policy aide, the foreign minister, they've all expressed a lot of caution about the possibility of making strides towards this meeting. The media has played it fairly seriously. They've toned down some of the snarkiness that occasionally is displayed towards U.S. leaders. And it's been kept fairly pragmatic.
Hey, Nick, and over to you now. I mean, obviously, Russia has a long history. Russian leaders has a long history of meeting with U.S. presidents. What do you make of sort of what we're hearing about sort of the optics of this meeting that's going to happen? The two are not going to meet one-on-one. There's Vladimir Putin meeting over the years with different leaders. Biden and Putin will not be meeting one-on-one, reportedly. And they're also going to be doing individual pressers and not a joint presser like we saw from former President Trump and Putin. What do you make of sort of what we're seeing around this specific meeting at this time?
Sure. Well, I don't think it's that unusual that they wouldn't necessarily meet one-on-one. When President Trump first met President Putin, Rex Tillerson, the then Secretary of State, was with him, and so they do anticipate a sort of small group meeting where that would happen. On the joint press conference, the big question there is, what would these two leaders actually have to say together? So I think, again, that's an indication of how low expectations are. The Biden folks really want to avoid what they're calling a Helsinki moment, when you had President Trump and President Putin on the stage together, and President Trump essentially took Vladimir Putin's word over his own intelligence community on whether Russia had hacked the U.S. elections. So they're desperate to avoid that. They're desperate to avoid a situation where Vladimir Putin pounces on anything that Joe Biden might say. They just don't feel they have anything to gain from that. And I think also, if you have Biden coming out in his own press conference, obviously that gives him a space to deliver his message and really control the narrative, or attempt to control the narrative. No doubt Vladimir Putin will try to do the same when he has his own press conference. So you're seeing, I think all of these things are really indications of how the U.S. just basically wants to get this thing back. What they're calling it, they want to establish guardrails on this relationship. So they don't want the crazy swings, and they really want to stop the spiral where relations just keep getting worse. So I think that's what you're seeing in the sort of planning for how this thing is going to happen tomorrow.
Tori, when we think about tomorrow, what ends up being a win for Vladimir Putin?
Again, just being at the summit with Biden is a win in its own way. I don't think there's any expectation there's going to be a great agreement reached. Putin, I think, would like to be able to push back against a lot of the U.S. talk on Ukraine, on the election meddling, on different regional issues, Russia's support for some of the regimes, say in Venezuela and Syria. I think Putin would like to be able to show strength. Not having a joint presser, I think that plays more to the U.S. than Putin.
Nick, same question to you. Well, similar question. What ends up being a win for Biden tomorrow?
Well, it's a great question, because there are so many ways that he can lose. He's staking a fair amount of his sort of policy chops and reputation on the idea of this meeting, that he's going to come in and talk tough to Vladimir Putin. Of course, this is nothing new for the Russian president. I think Biden is his fifth U.S. president that he's met since coming to power in Russia. So obviously, he's got a lot of experience with U.S. leaders telling him how displeased they are with his behavior. And obviously, it's has never shown any indication that whatever a U.S. president says to him will moderate his behavior at all. So what I would foresee is maybe some sort of vague statement on the possibility of a new dialogue on arms control. But otherwise, the proof is really going to be in what happens after this meeting. So Biden wants to establish some sort of credible deterrence. What's the next thing that Russia does that then undermines Biden and the whole notion that this was a good idea?
Right. And Nick, on that front, we're also, of course, seeing Biden having this meeting right after meeting with NATO leaders. And Biden has said that that NATO has the backing of what it is that he's doing. So it's going to be really interesting, too, to see what these leaders are watching for.
Well, right. But it is interesting. Obviously, there was a clear symbolism there that Biden said, OK, I want to check in with NATO allies and the G7 before I go and do that meeting. So sort of an expression of unity before he meets this adversary. But again, I keep coming back to this idea that Vladimir Putin has been totally undaunted by U.S. presidents in the past. They didn't stop him from invading Ukraine, Georgia, the election meddling, the cyber attacks, all sorts of things. There's really no indication that he's willing to moderate his behavior based on what a U.S. president says. We've obviously got this raft of sanctions that remain in place. No sign that those are going to come off. So I think what you're going to see is probably won't even see a joint statement. And again, that's why we're not going to have this double press conference. It's just too much for Biden to lose.
Tori, I want to end just thinking about the optics of this, a 5-hour meeting at the end of a long journey, the first foreign trip from President Biden. Putin, of course, was a KGB agent. How are you reading into the length of this meeting and the way that he's dealt with foreign leaders in the past?
Putin has often kept people waiting. He likes to play a little bit of a power game, maybe. And he has proved that he can last for hours. He has annual press conferences that last hours. He's very on top of his message. He's very focused. And he's very practiced. He's been in power for more than 20 years now. He knows how to control himself and often how to control the person he's talking to. I think he has more to win, again, out of the length of the meeting than Biden does. As Nick was saying, it is possible there will be some agreements on arms control. That would be in Russia's favor as well. The consular issue, definitely, if there's movement to return the ambassadors. Russia lost some diplomatic territory, some property under Obama. If there was any move to restore some of that, that would be a success as well. If there's a place for Russia at the table, that will look good for Putin. And as I said, Putin is practiced and he can last for hours in talks and remain on target.
Absolutely. A lot on the agenda for these two. First meeting of these two leaders in 10 years, so a lot to watch out for. Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams in Geneva and Tori Clark in Moscow. Thanks so much for starting us off today.